Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 51 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hey there, college football fans and Husker fans.
That's right. You might have noticed that there was a 2-week gap between our past episode 50, that we did with AJ Schmitz, and then this one. That's because there's actually a lost episode of College Football Throwdown. Last week I was back home in Traverse City, Michigan, and we did a podcast with myself and my sister Emma, where we talked about the Purdue game and the first round of the college football playoff rankings and all that stuff. But unfortunately, we had a technical issue with the audio of that one that made it so it couldn't be released. So we're going to kind of real quick go over some of the stuff about the Purdue game and our predictions before we dive into the Northwestern game against Nebraska, as well as all the stuff that's gone on in the wider world of college football.
Sounds like a good plan.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to it.
All right. Well, to kick us off, I believe you have a beverage for us.
I do, and I didn't prematurely open it yet either, so that's even better. Okay, here we go. We're going to celebrate your alumnus, your alma mater's victory tonight, Ohio U and the Fighting Frankies. There you go, buddy. Cheers to Fighting Frankies.
There we go. Good old Frank Solich, former Nebraska coach, there at Ohio University, doing good work.
Doing really good work this year. 8-2, you said.
Yeah, looking good. Might go to the MAC championship. That'd be fun.
That's right.
All right. Yes, talk about that Purdue game. That was one that I did not watch the game. I was listening to it because I was moving that particular Saturday, but I listened to the whole game on the radio. And you were actually there in person at the game. I
was, along with my brother and a few other friends, and we had a great time. I tell you, Purdue is really one of the better spots for RV tailgating, just in terms of the overall arrangement that they have there is really quite nice, very affordable. They're not out gouging you like some of the other Big Ten schools that we've experienced, and you know, it's a nice, decent walk to the stadium and that sort of thing. So pretty decent setup. Now, if only, you know, the crowd and the environment was attractive, which it was not. It was a game between two average teams, and there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm or energy in the crowd. Even though it was a night game, it was pretty flat for both teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there wasn't a ton of home support for Purdue, so it seemed like, you know, Nebraska had a disproportionate amount of seats compared to, you know, being the away team or whatever.
Right. There were a decent number of Nebraskans there, although I think clearly fewer Nebraska fans there this go around than the previous two games that I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right. So yeah, that was an interesting game to listen to say the least. You know, lots of disappointment. You know, listen to us just fail totally on offense, even while our defense is doing a good job of stopping Purdue. But then at the very end, to hear the announcers on the radio, you know, going over this amazing drive, you know, with Tanner Lee managing to score with under 2 minutes, you know, getting the touchdown to win us the game there at the end. I thought that showed some grit in our team, you know, that they weren't going to just give up. And Tanner played quite well in that game. I would say the best of the whole season for him.
I would agree, yeah. And yet, again, I'm feeling like a bit of a broken record, but it has to be said that this is a team that probably at least has won a couple more games at this point in the season, maybe even 3 additional games out of the 5 that we've now lost, could have been avoided if our coaches just called a slightly different game plan. And that's the part that's most frustrating to me is I think we have the talent that our record should, you know, reflect that, but it doesn't. because we called some really crappy games.
Yep, yep. We're going to be talking about more of that. Going over our predictions for the Purdue game, we had one prediction from way before the game, 2 weeks ago, because we had the bye week in between. At that one,
Yes.
I predicted a Nebraska victory of 28-27, so a 1 point victory. Whereas you, at the time, you predicted Purdue winning 35-21. But then on that podcast with AJ, you revised your prediction to say a 31-24 victory for the Huskers, which AJ also said he brought his information to the table in terms of how he thought we had better matchups against their players and all that. And in the end, Alex ended up being right, being the closest, being the with the 1 point victory of the actual score of 25-24 for Nebraska. So
That's true.
Yep.
That's true. But again, there were some drop passes in that game. We were basically right in line for a touchdown and a wide open right in the hands pass to
Pearson-L.
Pearson-L, and he drops it.
Yep.
And there are a couple of other drops in there that I really think that the score should have been a little higher on our end on that. That's what was so frustrating about the game.
A Purdue fan, though, would say that they suffered the same fate because they had some big drop balls as well.
Yeah, that is true.
So
they definitely helped us.
Mistakes on both sides. But then we hit this Northwestern game in which I was also
back home.
Right.
Yep.
Right. This was the one we were back home for because a friend of mine got married. And, of course, he did the thing that you hate, Dad. He got married on a football Saturday. So
yes.
I couldn't be following the game much, but I was, during the reception, getting the updates of the play-by-play on my phone. So I was just following it through that, which was, a different way to experience the game, but I've done that in the past. And I saw, that we were, keeping with him. The scores was pretty close throughout the game. Although, seeing us throw an interception so early in the game, and then they threw an interception on the drive right afterwards. I was like, oh boy, it's going to be one of those kinds of games. That's the feeling I got.
Right. Exactly. Well, and there were moments in the third and early fourth quarter where I felt like, okay, we're about ready to take control of this game, and then of course we don't. And again, at the end of the game, in a period, in a drive that was very critical, with just a few minutes left in the game, Nebraska is in a position where they're 10 yards, they're one first down away from getting in the field goal range. They're beyond the 50-yard line, ready to put the stake in the heart a little bit to get a 2-score lead, et cetera, et cetera. This is in the fourth quarter, and we've got 1st and 10 on their side of the ball, or their side of the 50 rather, and all we have to do is get that first down. And instead of trying to do everything they could to just put together a combination of running plays and short pass plays that would get us the 10 yards, or certainly get us to a 3rd and 1 or 2, so that we could put ourselves in the best position to have our full playbook available to us on that 3rd down. What do they do on 1st down? They throw the ball into the end zone, which of course is incomplete. Not quite the end zone. It was like the 2-yard line. But the point is they throw it all the way down the field. And then after having a decent 2nd down run, we end up in a circumstance where we're 3rd and like 5. And again, we don't get the 1st down. And because of that, and those choices of plays, again, we end up punting the ball to them when we should have been kicking a field goal. We have a great field goal kicker. Why our coaches weren't thinking in those terms, I do not know. And our coach had already gone for it on some 4th downs, had already been aggressive, earlier in the season even. Why would he not have seen the importance of that moment in time to put himself and call plays with the knowledge that they were going to go for it on 4th down? Just get as close as you can and then let your field goal kicker win the game for you. No, he punts the ball. It's that kind of crap that leads to losses, and That's the part that I cannot stand. It's so fundamental and basic and simple that that's the part that drives me crazy.
Yep. I hear you there. And like you say, the fact that we have a good field goal kicker, it's something that you don't think about until you don't have it. That's the way I always look at it when like your special teams is not good either in terms of your kickoff guy or your field goal kicker, or your punter, or your coverage teams or your punt returner. Once you don't have someone you can rely on to kick like field goals in the 40s, the high 30s and 40s, and even to the 50, with reliability, it severely kind of changes the way that you can plan out a tense moment like that when you're getting that red zone range. So, yeah, that's a frustrating moment for Mike Riley for sure. I have some stats pulled up here from the game, which I thought were rather interesting. Northwestern, we actually had a little bit more time of possession than them. It was 31-40 to 21-20, 28-20 rather, 28-20 for Northwestern. But they ran 80 plays to our 69 and out-yarded us 475 yards to 337. I thought that was interesting.
Wow.
Were they running more kind of a little hurry up at times?
Yes, they were definitely running some hurry up, and then also they were one of our scores was a pick six,
Right.
and so that added an additional possession for them, and diminished a possession for us.
Right. That's true. Yeah, and that, I mean, I think of all the stats, that's certainly the most important one. They threw 2 interceptions, whereas we threw 3. So kind of a sloppy game on all sides, which is interesting to me because Northwestern is usually the type of team where they don't do anything amazing, but they just play solid fundamental football and they don't shoot themselves in the foot. So that was kind of surprising to me to see them making mistakes like that.
Right, I agree. Totally agree. And given that they didn't play that well, it makes us losing to them even that much more unacceptable and brutal when you consider the fact that Northwestern came into our stadium and beat us with a B plus or even B minus kind of game on their side of the football. I guarantee you their coaches aren't looking at that game and saying that's the best game we played all season. They're looking at that game and saying, I can't believe we won. We played so bad.
Right. Yeah. Some other interesting stats. Rushing yards. They rushed it 45 times for 232 yards, whereas we did it for 31 times for 112. They had 243 passing yards to our 225. Tanner Lee threw the ball 38 times, completed it 21 times, whereas their guy threw it 35 times, completed it 19 times. So in terms of his completion percentage, Tanner wasn't bad, but obviously the interception problem kind of came back, which disappointed me because like I said, I thought he played quite well in the Purdue game, and to see him kind of fall apart here in the Northwestern game was definitely a bummer.
Right. Right. I agree. And, I think part of it is that he just gets into this mode sometimes where he decides that he's just going to throw the football no matter what, and he doesn't, stay focused on making those good decisions. When you need to back away and just throw the ball out of bounds and live for another day.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so last stats I'll talk about here. Like you said, both teams went for it on fourth quite a bit. They went for it 4 times and got it 3 times, whereas we went for it 3 times and got it 2 times. And then third down conversions, we were 5 of 15, whereas they were 1 of 11. So neither team doing very good on third downs. I know there was a lot of punting back and forth.
Again, great examples of the fact that Northwestern didn't have the best game, and yet they still beat us.
Mm-hmm. Right. Going into overtime, I was looking at the score, I remember, and I saw, okay, it's going, and then it looked like that they got the ball back and they were able to get a first down. I was like, oh wait, are they gonna go for the field goal? But time ran out, so went into overtime. And yeah, I mean, it's I wasn't paying too much close attention at that point, but they scored on us pretty easily, and then we just couldn't get anything going. It seemed like on our drive, and we just kind of whimpered out at the end.
Yep, that's right.
Yep.
I would agree. And again, we shouldn't have been in that situation.
Yep. And so we're not going to talk about this too much because we've already talked about it many times on previous podcasts. But we're 4-5 right now. We're playing against Minnesota next week, and then Penn State and Iowa to finish up the season. So personally, I would say two of those are likely losses for sure. Minnesota, I feel like they're not a great team. I feel like we can beat them. But Penn State and Iowa, I am definitely very concerned about. So that means I'm currently predicting a 5-7 season, which is what AJ predicted, way back in the summertime. So at this point, is Mike Riley, dead man walking unless he can pull out the miracle against Penn State?
I believe the answer to that is yes. However, the reality is that we need to be cautious about getting too ahead of ourselves in terms of having those conversations. I mean, I think we just need to let the season play out as you and I both expect it's going to, and then all of that stuff will take care of itself, and we'll figure out who that next coach is going to be. But our new athletic director, is in place now. He's doing his due diligence, and I guarantee you that at the end of the year, if it's a 5-7, like you say, or a 4-8 or whatever, then he's going to be able to stand up at that podium and say, okay, this is not an acceptable, trend for us here at Nebraska, and we're going to go in a different direction. End of story. But at the same time, you can't and don't want to say that too soon, because you need your players and your coaches and everybody to keep working hard till the end of the season, and what coaches you're interested in and what their situation is. What bowl games are they going to? Are they currently coaching, or are they already out of coaching? All those things factor into what an AD would ultimately decide.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I definitely agree with all that. We should mention what our the picks were. Once again, this is on the podcast we recorded last week that did not get released to the world,
Right.
so you have to take us at our word here, but I did write them down. I personally predicted a Nebraska loss. I predicted Northwestern would win 24-21, whereas, Dad, you predicted 28-24 Nebraska would win, and Emma predicted that Nebraska would win 24-21, whereas the final score was actually 31-24 to Northwestern in overtime. Although my point spread was off, I was correct in that Nebraska would lose the game.
Yep, you were. Good for you. We're keeping track of that.
You're so happy about that.
Crazy.
I'll have to go back and look through all the podcasts to see who won out in the end, because I feel like I've been doing better on the
you
picks.
have on the predictions. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's truth in that.
Yeah. Doesn't mean I'm always happy about it, but
No, exactly.
All right. And then also last week we talked about the college football playoff rankings. It was quite surprising seeing Georgia above Alabama, and then Notre Dame being so high compared to the AP poll, whereas Wisconsin was much lower than the AP poll had them, and things of that nature, showing how the committee is looking at strength of schedule as a very important factor, which they have in the past, but this is just another reiteration of that. And we had a bunch of games to look forward to, a lot of good games this past weekend. And some of them went as kind of predicted, but then there were some upsets as well. The biggest one by far is that Iowa beat Ohio State 55-24. I'm not sure anybody was predicting that.
No, not even Iowa fans. They would have been happy with a 1-point victory. The way that Iowa was able to just, once the ball got rolling, they were able to just dominate Ohio State. And frankly, how Ohio State now, I think on 2 occasions, their 2 losses, has demonstrated this Achilles heel that they have, where when they get behind, then the mistakes and the lack of focus and things of that nature tend to snowball on them. And that's a team leadership thing. It's a little bit of a coaching thing too, but a lot of times it's just about your team chemistry and your team leadership. And there are times when you can deal with adversity really well, and you respond and you come back fighting and playing even better. And then other teams kind of collapse under that kind of pressure. And it seems that Ohio State's one of those types of teams. They don't have that toughness, if you will, that drive to win under all odds. They tend to fall apart when they fall behind. I think that's going to probably hurt them at least one more time this year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's an example of the fickleness and the temporary nature of college football, and that after the Penn State victory where they pulled it out at the very end, everyone was talking about JT Barrett. Oh, he's back on fire. He made some great plays in that game. Talk about the Heisman stuff and all that again.
Right.
And you have this game where he threw a bunch of picks, and it was really not a good day for Mr. Barrett.
No, no, I agree. And you're exactly right about the whole Heisman thing. It's just crazy how that plays out. And ultimately, that quarterback's going to be a key player in that whole leadership thing. So when I speak of leadership, then certainly, the fingers being pointed at him among some other, key players on Ohio State's team. The other thing that was significant in that game was Ohio State. I had a player that got ejected who was the emotional and talent leader on their team, one of the best defensive linemen in the country, and he got ejected on a what I want to say spearing targeting call, and that changed everything about their defense, and that tells you how big a deal that sort of stuff is when you get an ejection like that. Nebraska's been the victim of that on a couple of occasions and had some really ugly games as a result. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at, and maybe we can discuss that at the end of the season. Is that rule, although well intended, maybe too severe in terms of how it changes the fabric of the game and can take a game that might have otherwise been close and make it a blowout, just because of the significance of that one player.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
it's no different than an injury, but it's kind of a forced injury absence type of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, we've talked about it in the past. And I definitely think that's something we should talk about in the future. The other big matchup, especially within the Big Ten, was the Penn State Michigan State game. And that would have been a fun one to watch live. I was looking at, I was refreshing the ESPN app to see, the scores of the games. And I saw that, Michigan State managed to keep it tied with Penn State, and then they got a field goal right there at the end of the game to win. And that was definitely a surprise to me after Penn State, I guess, just 2 weeks ago, they were like the number 2 team in the country according to the AP poll, and they lose to Ohio State. Now they've lost to Michigan State. Now they're out of the top 10 entirely.
Right. And again, that's that mental toughness element where you've got to be able to respond when you encounter a little adversity, and don't let one team beat you twice. And I think in this case, I think Iowa is guilty of, Penn State is guilty of allowing the Ohio State loss to beat them twice, because they did not look like the team that they've looked like earlier in the season, and give great kudos and props to Michigan State's team and their coaching staff particularly, who just basically played hard and aggressively. They played very aggressively, and it paid off for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and it's good definitely to see them, find some success. They're early in the season. I think they played Notre Dame early and got killed pretty badly, and so it wasn't looking great early. But then they beat Michigan, and now this game, so they've had some big wins, and now they're I think they're like 12th or 13th or something like that in the
Correct.
playoff
Yep.
rankings.
Yep. They're right in the thick of it. At this point. Now they still have to play Ohio State, so that there's some things there that still need to happen for them as the end of the season grows near. But they've certainly put themselves in the conversation.
Yep. And so I'm going to go through some of the other big games kind of quickly here. Clemson, NC State. Clemson won 38-31, but NC State played them close. Oklahoma State. Classic rivalry
Tight.
there.
Yeah.
62-52.
Well, stupid, no defense.
Yeah.
Big 12.
That's another one where I was refreshing the score, and it was like they'd already scored like 20. It was like 21-17 or something like that in the first quarter. It was like crazy. And then this was interesting. Iowa State, West Virginia. Iowa State losing 16-20, which normally wouldn't be that crazy to talk about, except that Ohio State, or Iowa State rather, is has been beating all these big teams, and they were the number one team in the Big 12 last week.
Right, I know.
So that is kind of such a weird thing to hear, isn't it? USC beat Arizona 49-35. Washington State beat Stanford 24-21. Miami beat Virginia Tech 28-10. So
I tell you, that Washington State score is as big a surprise as to me as any of the other scores. Excluding Ohio State, Iowa. But I mean, that just blows me away that Washington State, who really hasn't looked that good for a couple of weeks now, and got his ass handed to them by Arizona, could then turn around and beat Stanford. That just doesn't make any sense to me, and it tells me how upside down everything is out in the Pac-12 as well. And the Pac-12 and the Big Ten then find themselves after that crazy weekend you just described in a real predicament in terms of whether or not they will be in the mix for the 4 teams of the college football playoff this year, because there's only a few scenarios where it's clear they have a clear path to get there. Arizona now seems to be the leader, if you will, in or Washington,
right,
out there in the Pac-12.
Yeah, Arizona
but
lost, so.
Right. Did they lose this past weekend? Who did they lose to?
They lost to USC.
USC. Okay. So you got all these teams that have 1 loss or 2 losses in that conference, and so all their eggs are kind of in the Washington basket. Then, I mean, that team has to, I think, work its way all the way through and win out, and then they'll probably be ranked high enough to get it in the mix. But similarly, the Big Ten now is looking at really their best hope would be for a undefeated Wisconsin team to emerge as the conference champion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. I was looking ahead at Washington's schedule. They still have to play Stanford and then Washington State at the end of the year, which that's a rivalry game that's going to be a big one for the Pac-12 for sure, especially if they both keep winning.
Yep.
And then us being in the Big Ten, of course. That was the first thing I mentioned to you after we were talking about the games was with Ohio State and Penn State losing. Now they both have 2 losses, so they're basically out of the discussion in terms of the national playoff, which means that the Big Ten's only hope at this point is that Wisconsin goes undefeated.
Right, because I think if Wisconsin were to lose one and then end up winning the conference, I think a 1 loss Wisconsin probably is left out unless some other things happen, elsewhere in the country. Because you're looking at a Georgia, Alabama, collision course, one of which is going to be in for sure, and the other one will be on the outside looking in. For example, if Alabama were to lose in a conference championship game against Georgia, I think there's a very good chance they still would drop not that far and end up being that 4th team as a possibility. So you'd have 2 SEC teams, and then of course you've got whoever wins the ACC, whether it's Clemson or Miami or whoever, that's going to be a key player in that whole mix. And then you got a Notre Dame team now that's looking like they have a very good chance of being highly regarded, highly ranked if they don't, lose to somebody. So now what do you do? Now you only have one seat at the dance left, and it's gonna have to be decided among the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the Big 10.
Right. Well, or I mean, this would be a crazy scenario, but like you said, what if it's Georgia and Alabama? 'Cause they give it to Alabama for having the quality loss against Georgia if they play them close or something in the conference championship game, and then you have Notre Dame, and then let's say that means Notre Dame would have beaten Miami. So then let's say Clemson gets in. So then that's it. ACC, Notre Dame, and two SEC teams, and the three other conferences are totally left out.
Yep, exactly. I mean, I can see some scenarios where that would play out, and all these other schools have kind of beat up on each other, and that's what happens when you are injecting a talented and highly ranked Notre Dame into the mix. So now all of a sudden, there's at least two schools that are going to be left out, and then if you start recognizing what Georgia's done, all of a sudden you can see, given the schedule that Alabama had this year, things are going to be a little bunched up there at the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, so yeah. And talking about that, just as this past weekend was full of good games, this new week 11 is this upcoming weekend is also packed with some really big games. I was listening to the XM radio college football station, and they were talking about how with this advent of the playoff era, it's made November really exciting because every week has all these big matchups that matter. You're looking at the
Right.
dynamics of what losses affect who in terms of the playoff race and all that stuff.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing is that because of all these big games this weekend, things are going to clear up a little bit, but then there'll be new scenarios that after all the dust settles, now who's still in the discussion, you know, and the it's interesting. It's going to then the whole Heisman discussion is going to start coming in here in next week, week and a half, because right now a lot of the players who were thought to be at the top of that discussion have had at least one less than stellar game or slower game, if you will. And so some people have put up some monster numbers, like Saquon Barkley, and some of the quarterbacks like Barrett, JT Barrett, and Baker Mayfield has put up some crazy numbers, but he's also nearly lost a few times, and his team has played down to its competition. Um, it's just I don't know. It's hard for me to get excited about his numbers when you realize that he's in the Big 12 and they seem to not be playing defense out there.
Right. Well, yeah. And so I'm just going to go through some of these big games because it really is a stacked weekend. We have Washington versus Stanford, which I think we
That is
talked about
big.
earlier. Michigan State plays Ohio State, which we mentioned.
Yep, that's also big.
Right. Oklahoma State, Iowa State, which is interesting. Given if Ohio State could pull off another I mean, I don't know. They might even be ranked higher than them, probably since Oklahoma State lost to Oklahoma. But I would still consider it an upset if Iowa State were to beat them.
Absolutely, I would
Yep.
agree.
And then Georgia versus Auburn, big game in the SEC.
Yes.
Iowa versus Wisconsin, now taking on greater importance since Iowa beat Ohio State, and
Oh yeah.
now that eyes are on Wisconsin now for being like that champion of the Big Ten, like we mentioned. Alabama, Mississippi State, Notre Dame, Miami, very very big game,
Oh, huge
and
game.
and
Yeah.
then TCU, Oklahoma as well. So great weekend of college football.
It should be. It should be. Yay! I'm looking forward to it.
Right. So yeah, I think like you say, the Notre Dame factor does make things interesting because if Miami were to beat them, then Notre Dame's out of the competition, and then that opens it back up to okay. So even if two SEC teams and the ACC champ gets in, then that leaves one other spot open for the rest of the conferences.
Yeah, yeah, it's just going to be really crazy.
Hmm.
And I could see all three of them being left out. I really could, which would be it would cause that whole thing. It would cause that whole thing to blow up, and probably the conversation about having 8 teams in a playoff would become much more prevalent if
Yes.
something like that were to play out.
No, I definitely agree that that would happen. Although, so let's say we have that scenario that we just discussed, but where we also have like a champion from, I don't know, I guess let's say Washington in the Pac-12 who has one loss but is a conference champion, or TCU in the Big 12 or Wisconsin from the Big 10 that have one loss, are conference champions versus Alabama who has one loss and is not a conference champion, lost their conference championship game, and having played a relatively, lesser schedule, they haven't had
Yep.
as much difficulties as Georgia has in their strength of schedule. That would be an interesting challenge, to say, do you bring in one loss Alabama who isn't a conference champion over these other conference champions who have done that feat?
Right. So, there, all of that's going to play out, right?
Yep. Yep. No, it's going to be fun to watch,
Okay.
and we'll talk about it here on
It
the
is.
podcast, I'm sure.
Ex- exactly. Exactly. And I agree with the folks that you were listening to on the radio that say that that's one of the nice things about this college football playoff is it definitely has changed the dynamic and the extent of conversations and the number of teams that are still in it. It takes away some things, but it also adds some, and this is one of the things that it adds.
All right. And then last thing we'd be remiss not to talk about the upcoming Minnesota-Nebraska game,
Yes.
which is at Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Right. Playing for the $5 broken trophy that's been resurrected. I've seen some funny pictures of
Yeah.
that,
Yes.
which I think is fun. But what are you thinking in terms of predictions? How do you see this matchup playing out? I know Minnesota has also had a struggle this season. The record is not
Well,
great.
yes, but they played hard and seemed to like the direction that their coach has taken them in. So I'm here to tell you that they smell the blood in the water of the Nebraska program, and I guarantee you that that new coach is going to have that team fired up and ready to win. Because this is one he looks at and he on the calendar now and says that's a win for me. That's a big signature win for me just because of the Nebraska name, and so he's going to market for it. And I think we're given our lack of fortitude that we've showed in some other games, I think they're going to smack us in the mouth. We're not going to respond well to it. Tanner Lee is going to throw a few picks, and wham bam, we're in trouble. So I'm now convinced that we're not going to win this game, and so I'm going to predict about a 10-point loss. So let's go. Let's go. Um, let's go 31-21. Minnesota wins.
Okay. Minnesota 31. Okay. Yeah, I was just looking through their schedule. They're 4-5 actually, just like we are in terms
Right.
of schedule. What's interesting though is they've had some kind of blowout-y losses. Like they lost 33 to
Right.
10 to Michigan this past weekend.
Hmm.
But
But
then
if you watch that game, they played Michigan tough for quite a while in that game.
right, and then like against Michigan State, they only lost by 3. It was 30-27.
Exactly. Yep.
But then they lost to Maryland, earlier in the year as well. So it kind of goes back and forth there. Just to be a contrarian, and partially to be a contrarian to create some drama here, and partially because I do think that Minnesota, from the little I know about them, is not that great a team. I think we're definitely more talented than them. If we,
Well, I would agree.
Yeah, I know you agree with that. It's all about the play calling and our players' attitudes and all that, which
Right.
you're right, very well may not be there, and the fact that this is an away game, so they give it a little advantage for that. But I'm gonna say that we're gonna win this game, and then we're gonna lose the next two, and we're gonna end the season 5-7. That's my current prediction. So I'm gonna say that Nebraska wins. Let's say 28-27. It'll be
Okay.
close,
Wow.
close game, but I'm going to say
Hmm.
that Nebraska wins it.
Well, it would be nice to get that victory. There's no doubt about it. I want that victory. I want every week to be a victory, but at the same time, I have to be realistic.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you there. All right. Anything else you want to say to our fans before we sign off for the night?
Well, it's interesting. I think as fans, there was even a call on some of the local radio programs and stuff to have people kind of just chill their wheels about our conversations relative to potential coaching changes, et cetera, et cetera. Because the reality is that no one's in a position right now to act on any interest or anything like that because it's just too early in the season, and regardless of who our athletic administration is kind of lining up as their targets for a potential coaching change, if in fact they're doing that, is something that we will have plenty of time to discuss after it happens or even after the final game of the year. But it's pretty apparent we're not likely to be going bowling this year, and so we're going to have that whole off season period to identify that new coach, and then figure out when they're going to be able to get there, and after their team's done with their bowl game or whatever, or is it somebody that's not coaching currently? I mean, so there's all those possible variables there.
Right. And this is something I just thought of. Let's say we finish, like I said, we finish 5-7. Um, but does Mike Riley, and we're not going bowling, or well, I guess let's fine for the sake of argument. Let's say that we're 6-6. So we beat West Minnesota, we beat Iowa, but we lose bad to Penn State. But we go to lesser bowl. Does Mike Riley get fired before the bowl game, or do you think Bill Moos plays it out, or would if Scott Frost is still having success at UCF, would he want to leave his team, when they're about to go to a prestigious bowl, to come to Nebraska in that time? Nope. Hello?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay.
What was your question? I guess I missed the.
Well, I guess my question would be, A, would we fire Mike Riley before bowl season if we were going bowling? And B, would somebody like a Scott Frost or somebody who is a current head coach at like a lesser school come to Nebraska before they play their bowl game?
Okay, now I understand the question. I thought you were just making a comment. I apologize. I was waiting for you to expound on it.
Oh, sorry.
I think the answer is I think the answer is that if Moose is going to make a change, and I believe he does, and I believe he's going to, it's going to happen after the final regular season game, after that Iowa game on Black Friday. Sometime after that, there's going to be an announcement, of the firing of Coach Riley and his staff, and then it's going to be a matter of how long does it take or for the athletic department to make a choice and arrive at a commitment from another party to get the ball rolling, because he's going to want to get on recruiting and all that. And if the coach that they're interested in is got a bowl game, which you would hope that if it's an active coach they are in that situation, then that coach is going to have to decide, are they willing to wait it out, or are they going to come immediately? Now, usually when you're going up to a larger job, to a more prestigious, address, you usually leave the job you're at and let one of your assistants, take over for the bowl game, and then you immediately begin to go to work on the other staff, right? Because you got to hire coaches, you got to get the recruiting, all that stuff. So
Right. I hear you there, but I'm just envisioning a scenario like, let's say, and so I think this would be a good thing. Scott Frost, his UCF team is undefeated, and so they're going to a good bowl game. I don't know. I just feel like in that scenario, where your guys have done everything that you asked of them, and they're undefeated, and they're playing in this prestigious bowl despite being a more mid-tier school. I feel like if he likes those kids, which I'm sure he does, then he wouldn't want to leave them hanging like that. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you. And there have been plenty of coaches who've made the request to stick around. But the fact is, unless you're competing for a national championship or one of those really high-end bowls, then you usually should and do leave and take that new position and get going with. You're now focused on building that program. So the other one is now in your rearview mirror immediately once you make the decision that that's what you want to do as a coach.
Right. Yep. I hear you there. All right. Well, thank you for being on this episode of College Football Throwdown with me. We did a little recapping of last week as well as talking about this week. And hopefully we'll be here next week talking about our victory over Minnesota.
There you go. That would be nice. I would love it. And, like you say, it's going to be an interesting few months, so we'll have lots to talk about.
Oh, yeah. There's one good thing. We'll have plenty to podcast about.
That's right.
So if you all out there enjoyed this podcast, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can find us online at College Football Throwdown. You can find us on iTunes by searching under that name. Leave us ratings and reviews on there. Or you can go to our main website at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. Download the podcast there. Leave a comment. Things of that nature. So we hope to hear from you. And we'll be back next week to talk about that Minnesota game. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.